Thanks for tuning in and welcome to Marketing Bites Restaurant Growth Unwrapped. I'm your host, Brian Siemienas, the Vice President of Restaurant Solutions for Nift. Today I welcome our guest, Geordy Murphy, founder of FobeSoft and Cypress Hospitality Group. Welcome, Geordy.
Thank you, Brian. It's a pleasure to be here.
Looking forward to today's conversation. So starting off, throughout your career, your passion has been imagining, creating, building, and operating some of the most talked about hotels, restaurants, and resorts across the country. Can you share some of the highlights and projects throughout your career?
Yes. Well, the first restaurant / club that I opened was the Plaza Club in Honolulu, Hawaii in 1979-80. I did that with Russell Sue for Club Corporations of America. And the cool thing was it gave me an opportunity to live in Hawaii and surf the North Shore for 2 years. And then when after a couple of years, I knew that I couldn't get a job back with CCA unless I graduated from college. So I went back to school in Colorado and finished in when I graduated, I got a job with them running a country club, but eventually moved to San Francisco, where I did Coletto's for the Kimpton Group, which was, they say, San Franciscan's favorite Italian restaurant at the time. I took it over at less than $2 million and got it to about $8.5 million, making 24% profit. And then I did Post Trio with Wolfgang Puck, which was a lot of fun. That was spent 3 years with Wolf before I went out on my own. And then when I did Geordy's, that was, probably the highlight because 93, 94, we were one of the top 10 best new restaurants in the country by Esquire, Bon Appetit, Food and Wine, etc. So that was cool.
So you named a couple, celebrity chefs in there and, in the early days, whereas nowadays it seems like there's just so many more. What was it like working with them? And, as you look at today's, and while certainly Wolfgang Puck and some of them are still very well established, as you look at the total array of the ones out there, how have you seen that change in the industry since you started working with them?
Well, like you mentioned, there's a lot more celebrity chefs out there. But meeting and working with Wolf for 3 years, and we've been friends ever since, and that was 25 years ago. Like last year, he did a project he did a couple of dinners in Orlando, and his best friend Guy Leroy, who's retired in outside of Columbus, Georgia, came to my house, and we got in the car and drove over and spent 2 days with Wolf, and just had a great time. I'm still friends today with Russell Sue. It's too bad that David Boulay, from New York passed away last year, but he was really cool to work with. It seems to me, though, that a lot of it has become, there's a lot of TV and media that has gotten involved, of course, with the chefs that have made more chefs celebrity chefs in today's time.
Yeah, the one thing as I think over, my duration of visiting restaurants, back in the day, the celebrity chef as it was didn't have as many restaurants, and they really were what I would say is there. Whereas today it seems like they're lending their name and, a recent, which I was so excited, was in New Orleans watching my beloved Gators lose to LSU for a change on the road. And we went to one of Emerald's restaurants, and it was ironically his birthday. And it turned out on his birthday, he likes working, and he was actually in the kitchen, which, nowadays is pretty rare. But, how do you agree with that it's, more of lending the names? And, did you see that evolution happening as you worked with them on, projects where maybe taking their portfolio to just a few that they worked in them?
Oh, no, I agree with it. It's business. I mean, they want to, you can't fault them for wanting to, maximize on opportunities that come to them. The key is, though, that they keep their thumb on it. Like Wolf knows. He's involved in all the restaurants. He travels around they had a special dinner, like I just mentioned, the one in Orlando, and he went down there and helped for 2 days Everybody was in the kitchen and he was doing stuff, and it was really cool. But as long as they're paying attention to what they're doing, and if you look at the top ones, with Wolf and Jose Andreas and, some of the other ones out there, I don't fault them at all. I mean, it's an opportunity that I think they need to maximize. I mean, if you get to over 100 of them, I mean, that could be a little different, but 10, 20, 30, they can all, a lot of them can handle it. Some of them can't. Some of them just took the opportunity and moved on. And I think, the industry kind of knows a couple of those that are out there.
Okay. So going back to your career, in 2001, you founded Cypress Hospitality Group and have been president and owner ever since. What motivated you to do this, and what does Cypress Hospitality Group do?
Well, we're headhunters for the hospitality industry. We find talent. I sold Long Life Noodle Company at the time in San Francisco back to our partners. And I moved from San Francisco to Ponte Vedra Beach, where I grew up, to raise our kids. And when I moved back to Florida, initially there was not many restaurants here. So the opportunity, and I didn't necessarily want to go open my own restaurant again. So I started a search firm for the hospitality industry. And with all the contacts I had, it's hard for a lot of these guys, i.e. Wolf at the time, Michael Chiarello, rest his soul too, Boulay, these guys, they're in their restaurants, they're working 60, 70 plus hours a week to turn around and find a talented sous chef. It's time consuming. And when we have 2 or 3 recruiters, I have one main recruiter, then she just knows, she's from the industry, and she knows what these people are looking for. So it really opened up an opportunity for us and for these chefs and restaurateurs to find the right operators. Like, right now I'm looking for a couple people for a company in Alaska. I'm looking for, I'm looking for a couple people in Jacksonville and all over. I need somebody in the islands. And it's neat. It keeps me in the business, and I don't have a set of keys.
So from the recruiting standpoint, certainly since 2001 when you founded the company to 2025, so many things have changed from, technology. We didn't have these back then. I remember my first BlackBerry, prior to the pager. From a restaurant standpoint, you've seen just chains and the, competition grow greatly. Still think that the employee is, has the advantage today versus the employer. What are some of the changes and adaptations that you had to make, over the years in, your area?
Well, I think we were lucky to be headhunters in the industry and all come from the industry. So we understand it. There are a lot of headhunters out there. They don't understand that for someone like, say, I use this, again, for Boulay in New York that needs a general manager at the time, you don't send a TGI Friday manager to somebody like that. You have to know that it's a fine dining manager and to specify. But I think today one of the challenges is there's a lot less people that have gotten into and want to be in the industry. People don't necessarily, like Michael Chiarello told me, we had dinner a couple of years ago, and he said, people don't want to work like we did. And, we just knew that, being trained classically or whatever, from, be it French, Italian, whatever, that, you were there in the morning and you didn't go till, the last meal went out the majority of the time. And today, with today's society, I think that people would rather be out on Fridays and Saturday nights than be working on Friday and Saturday nights. So what that's done, I think, is taken some of these people that have put the time in and then get their opportunity to open their own place. It's become less and less, and the talent, there's just not as much talent as there used to be.
Yeah, totally. And, one of the things in the industry, and as I've seen evolved, and would love your take on it, when I first started, whether it was executives or, your top management, you would be around a bit, unless you, as I joked, would violate one of those company policies, which certainly does happen in companies. You would be given time to, have an impact. As I joke, takes you takes you a little bit of time to understand how the company operates, where the restrooms are, and all those critical things. But today we're seeing in those positions turnovers of literally 8 months, a year, where people are barely given a year to try to make a change, and sometimes in brands that have been declining for decades. How has that impacted what you're trying to do, especially when relocations and all those other things are involved?
Well, I think for the higher level, it's almost like sports. An analogy of these professional teams that, they give a guy 1 or 2 years, and if you don't get in the playoffs or go deep into it, you get fired. It takes time to change the culture that you're going into, and typically when you get that opportunity, there's been something that hasn't gone right in the situation you're walking into. And the shareholders are almost like fans. I mean, it's like they want to see the stock price go up, and it takes time for these things to happen. And I think that the revolving door is not good for the business, the employees, the person itself, the shareholders, anything. But here again, you have to have a board that's going to make the right decision, hopefully, to hire the right person to put in that position to at least keep it status quo and start, the turnaround or whatever they're trying to do at that point. But I think that these guys need a little, these people need a little more time to accomplish what they're trying to accomplish. I mean, the biggest one right now is Starbucks. That's just massive. So, but he's making changes and he's doing things. That's the other thing is you have to make a decision and move on. Right decision, wrong decision. You can go back and change it if it wasn't the correct decision, but you have to be doing things if you're going to make an impact.
Yeah. So in 2014, you founded FobeSoft, trying to help restaurants with profitability. Can you explain in detail what the company does and why you ended up jumping into this in addition to the HR and recruiting side?
Right. Well, I'm a cyclist. One morning I was riding my bike and I was listening to Steve Jobs' book, and he made a comment that if you can identify a problem and solve that problem, you have an opportunity. So the problem in the restaurant business, it's a rear view mirror business. You operate for a month, you wait a week, 10 days into the next month to get your profit and loss statement, and then analyze it takes a couple of days. So you're 2 weeks into the next month if you're lucky. And if you have an issue, that issue is compounded for another at least 2 weeks. Then you have to implement things to try to change it or solve whatever that issue might be. And I was getting calls from friends of mine that wanted to, would you run a set of numbers for me? Would you look at my P&L, et cetera? And I had this idea from when I had Long Life Noodle Company. I had 6 restaurants. So I would load this program on all the computers in the restaurant. And at night, all the manager had to do was enter food, beer, wine, liquor, the front of house, back of the house labor, because the salaries are built in behind with workman's comp, payroll taxes, et cetera, and whatever they spent that day. And then they would fax them to me to date myself. I'd get up in the morning and I'd have 6 P&Ls in front of me, and it would give me an idea of where I should start my day. Now, what we've done with FobeSoft is we've made it almost completely seamless. So now we import the food, beer, wine, liquor, merchandise sales from the point of sale system. We import the front of house and back of the house labor. We have EDI connection with every major broadliner. So when the invoice hits the restaurant, we get the invoice. And then we built some AI that parses the invoice to the correct cell that's 97% accurate. Also, if you're, say you deal with Cisco and you get the Cisco invoice, but you buy your fish from a fishmonger. Well, that guy can write 10 pounds of tuna at $12 a pound on a napkin. And you take a picture of it, it goes to the cloud, parses to the cell, to food, specifically fish. And we only need to map it one time, and it'll start doing that every single time. It can be, like I said, it can be, on a napkin. It could be another invoice from a different, purveyor. So what's happening now is our clients are getting a daily profit and loss statement that runs month to date compared to a budget that then they barely have to touch a thing. So we're giving them the information they need daily to make the right decisions. We use the term manage to the bottom line. 10 days into it, if you see your back of the house labor is high and your, liquor costs are out of control, you've got 20 days to fix it. You don't operate for the next 20 days and say, oh my gosh, that happened. You have the tools and the knowledge to fix it. Plus we did this little thing. We have these bouillons on the side of each category that we call the fixes. So it's red or green. If it turns red, all these opportunities, did you try this? Did you try that? So we're giving them opportunities to fix things. But one of the keys to the whole thing is we've broken it out into 4 different categories, and we want to take little bites. We have your sales, of course, but then you've got your cost of goods, your labor, your controllables, and your non-controllables. And we feel we can find a point in each category, because if you concentrate, even if it takes a month to concentrate on that one category, you find a point. The next category, you find a point. The 2 others, you find a point. So if you're making 10% and you work it, you're making 14% profit, which is a 40% increase. I mean, that's a lot, but that's how it gets done. And one of the reasons that we break them out like that, like we have a client that signed up with us 2 months or so ago, and we were analyzing the P&L. They had $350,000 in supplies at the end of the year. Now, what are they? I mean, that's almost $30,000 a month they're spending. But where? How? Why? We saved them $100,000, boom, just by giving them a budget, and now the budget's working for them. So that's how we do it. And I think one of the neat things that gives us, I think, some validity in what we're doing. There's I mentioned Jose Andres earlier. He was on a podcast a few months back, and they said, what's the most important thing a new restaurateur can do? And his comment was, understand the financials. And then most recently on Netflix, there's a Master Chef series, and there's a chef named Evan Funky. He's got one of the hottest restaurants in the country called Felix in LA, and he's got 4 other restaurants. And he was being interviewed in his first restaurant. They went out of business. They asked him why. He said they spent $3.5 million, but he had no idea about the financials. And he said, going forward, that's the number one thing that he learned. And it's a business. And granted, you're in there, you're cooking, you're serving people, you're, hoping your staff shows up, all these things going on, but it's a business. And when you understand the financials, it gives you a great opportunity to maximize the profit.
So you mentioned some examples. What type of improvement does a typical restaurant see when they work with you?
A minimum of a point or 2, easily. I mean, if you think of it, you can ask any restaurateurs that are going to listen to the podcast. If you were given an opportunity to focus just on your labor, your hourly labor, for a week or 2, do you think you could save a point? The thing is about hourly labor, if you save an hour a day in the front of the house and an hour a day in the back of the house off your schedule, you're going to save about $14,000 to $18,000 a year. I mean, that's massive. That can pay rent for a couple of months. So, but initially, what happens is when we get someone's past financials or set them up in our system, the 4 different categories, we save them a lot of money right there. Be it credit card fees, be it, have them go to a different person for, liability insurance for the restaurant. There's numerous opportunities, from your linen and laundry, from your chemicals. Is the dish machine calibrated correctly? I mean, there's opportunity all over the profit and loss statement. It's just knowing where to look and then budget it. So, you're 2.5 weeks into the month, and the chef wants to buy a new RoboCoupe. This is still working, kind of grinding a little bit, but you look at the kitchen supplies budget, and you say, do we have? I've got $800 left in it, and a RoboCoupe's $1,700. Can I wait 2 weeks to buy it? So, and you can't. So that right there, it helps in your cash flow also. But we definitely impact the restaurant. And we have a client that has a few restaurants, and his comment was, not only did you make me more profitable, you turned my nephew, who was the manager, you turned my nephew from a manager into an operator. And that's one of the things that we try to do too, because people learn how to operate from the profit and loss statement.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And it's, one that, as I talk to people who aren't as familiar with the industry and, just how small those profit numbers are and why you're seeing such the behemoths that are buying multiple brands, because, if you or I own a restaurant and are, bringing in a 10% to the bottom line, that's tough to live on, depending on what your top line volume is. But if you've got 1,000 restaurants, you start getting a little bit more, you can amortize some of those costs across. So, certainly you say it's important. And when you look at it, is the product intended for, multi-unit enterprise, or could a single unit operator work with you guys and,
we have
those basics?
We have a ton of independent operators. And those are a lot of the ones that we impact the most. But multi-units, we have a version called the Boss View, where you can take 2, 3, 4, 5 restaurants and we put them on one URL. So when they log in, they're seeing all 4 restaurants lined up across next to each other. And I learned from a guy who was a president of a restaurant company in New York that had 12 restaurants at the time. He said the best thing to do is you line the P&Ls up next to each other. You're going to save money right there. Why did this guy spend $1,200 in china, glass, and silver, and this guy spent $200 in china, glass, and silver? And as you go down the list, when they're next to each other, it really gives you an opportunity to see how they're operating. And that alone opens your eyes. But it's basically across the board, and it's probably 94 or 5% customizable. So we're not saying that, if it's kitchen supplies, you have to call it kitchen supplies, or whatever the category can be. We can somewhat put it in your terminology. Like we have some juice bars, and their hourlies are called juiceristas, so that's what we put in for their hourly labor is juiceristas. But the key is when we set somebody up, that they look at it to operate in the way we're helping them operate. And that's where we find them the most. That's where we maximize the opportunity.
So certainly you're bringing visibility and, educating. And for those independent operators, we know it's a tough road. I mean, the failure rate is, super high. Is there a problem that's pretty universal that, literally you see it, pretty instant, that happens everywhere? And, how can they fix it for those starting out?
Well, I would say one of the universal problems is, it's no, the restaurant industry basically runs on QuickBooks, a lot of it. And QuickBooks is basically set up for a manufacturing company. So one of the first things we do is we organize the person, because even if you buy a franchise, the franchisor is going to say, find a bookkeeper and, use QuickBooks. Well, this person might not be no restaurants or have any restaurant clients. So is your food cost, calculated off your food sales, beer off beer, wine off beer, et cetera, or is it calculated off total sales? So we had one just the other day. The guy thought he was running a 31% food cost because he calculated his food costs off total sales, and the food cost ended up being 46%. I mean, we thought he was going to have a heart attack on the P&L review when we went over the budget with him. The other thing is is just the categorization of things. We had a client that categorized their sales by Grubhub, Uber Eats, and a couple of the other delivery systems. Well, I mean, how do you break that out to know what was what? So that's one of the first things we do is we get them organized because a lot of them out there aren't organized, just like the comment that what I just mentioned previously about having $360,000 in supplies. I mean, what is it? So, and it doesn't take long for us to do it at all. I mean, we get someone signs up with us, we have them up and running within a few days, and their manager's trained, and it's a simple platform. I mean, if the manager leaves on Friday, we can train the new one on Monday. So it's very simple to use. But I think here again, that's something that scares some of the operators away, and so people don't shy away from it. But people need to pay attention to the financials, or they're not going to be there.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things I think makes our industry one of the toughest to work in is, you've got to focus on all areas. You can have the most phenomenal food and people love you, but if you're not making money, it's going to be tough to stay in business. Likewise, if you're focused solely on the P&L and the cost, not worrying about driving sales, you're going to be in the same boat because at some point you can't cut yourself to success. And your earlier point on the recruiting, why, the hospitality industry, it's very complicated. And some of these brands, you've got a lot to worry about from the people side, which, the headaches there, costs, as you said. We've been talking controllables. My favorite's the uncontrollable, where a bad decision's made on rent that you're never going to get enough sales to be able to justify and pay back, what that is, or the CapEx to build out. I saw that early in my career where the build outs, you're having to get an extra couple $100,000 in sales, because you went with wrong finishes or, whatever you may have done. So,
or your line's not set up correctly for the menu that you want to do. I mean, there's numerous things that can happen.
Yeah, absolutely. So as we look, 2024 in the industry was, certainly a challenging one. Started to see some, positive, some additional brands. Fourth quarter, better results. Still some, a lot of people are suffering. What do you expect performance-wise in 2025?
I think it's going to continue. If you look at, a lot of the people that are retiring, a lot of those people eat out, might be an early bird special or whatever, but, you've got that. And then you have the younger generation that spent more of their disposable income on dining out than anything. So I think the opportunity's there. I think it can continue, but I think that the operators need to continue to focus on the product they're putting out for value, and paying attention to their business, to their financials. But I have a positive outlook for this year.
Yeah. So moving on in the episode, one of the things I love, and we talked about it, the personalities in the hospitality industry are all over the place, unique backgrounds. So I love getting into some, personal side and questions with my guests. So first off, like myself, you've been in the industry for a while. If you could go back and give yourself advice as you started the journey, what would it be?
I would say I would try to find a mentor, someone that so I didn't have to scratch and claw and basically learn everything myself, or work from different companies. Someone that could answer the questions that arise. I feel now I could do for someone, but I wish I had that opportunity when I was younger. Entering the industry.
When you were in elementary school, what did you want to do when you grew up?
Be a doctor or an artist? You just don't know in elementary school. But growing up in Florida, we were all surfing and such, but you didn't think about being a professional surfer then.
Okay. When we were younger, you could start working a lot earlier. I think some of the legal restrictions. What was the first job you ever had?
The first job I had was a locker room attendant at the Ponte Vedra Inn and Club, which was interesting because I think, like you said, I was 14 or 15 years old. And then I had a paper route. So I had delivered 265 papers when I was 16 years old and a Volkswagen, which I liked. That was nice.
Okay, you've worked with some incredible chefs, as you shared earlier, some incredible restaurants, ranked at the top in the country. What is your favorite restaurant?
Now it's interesting, and
you can have a couple answers on there, so I'll let you. It's a general question, so you can elaborate.
Right. Like we have a friend that's going to Washington D.C. I think next week, and I love Les Diplomats in Washington D.C. Stephen Starr does a great job with all of the restaurants he does. My favorite restaurant used to be Boulet, but David's not around any longer. But yeah, and I like, Daniel Boulud's restaurants and John George's restaurants. I mean, those are, they're some of my favorites.
Okay, you've mentioned a lot of, fine celebrity chef driven restaurants. What about from a chain standpoint? Who where do you like going? Who do you think's doing it right?
Well, it depends on how you're going to define a chain, because from a chain restaurant, I mean, Nobu's got like 30 locations. I mean, that would be probably considered a chain.
Yeah.
But I mean, if it's a chain, I mean, maybe you go get a steak, at a Capitol Grill, even a Ruth Chris. There's a restaurant in Chicago called Maple and Ash, and they've got 3, almost 4 or 5 locations now, which is just tremendous. So yeah.
Okay, you've met some incredible people and worked with them. If you could have a meal or drink with anyone dead or alive that you have not met or know, who would it be and why?
I'd like to have an Italian meal with the Pope. I just think that would be one of the most interesting opportunities. I don't even know if people ever have an opportunity to do that, but I just think it'd be fun.
Is there a specific Pope, or any Pope would be fine?
The current Pope, Okay.
I
mean, I actually was lucky. I mean, I've been to a couple masses at the Vatican and saw the last 2 popes did a mass, but you're one of tens of thousands of people. But the current Pope would be interesting.
Okay, you talked about Italy. You've earlier in your career, Hawaii, San Francisco. What's your favorite city, and what's your favorite country in the world?
Wow, I would say Paris in France, and then the Tuscany region in Italy. I was lucky enough to cycle there for a week a few years back, which was just one of the coolest things. And then the food and the just laid backness of the whole thing was really neat.
Okay, what's your favorite activity when you're not working?
Cycling, swimming, and then when I get an opportunity, snow skiing. But I cycle 3 days a week, swim 3 days a week, and then when the snow flies, hopefully get out there once or twice.
Okay. I've mentioned in your past some cities with great sports teams, from San Francisco, New York. You're in Florida now, as we talked earlier before we started recording. Both of us have children that are Gators. Who is your favorite sports team?
The Niners and the Giants. Almost 20 years in the Bay Area, and it was 20 years when it was really cool. The Niners going to the Super Bowl the amount of times they did, and the playoffs every year pretty much. And then even, the Giants were in the playoffs every year, the Barry Bonds days. It was a lot of fun back then in the Bay Area. So I'm still an avid fan of both of those.
Okay. Have you picked up any of the Florida teams? Much like you, I grew up in Chicago in the heyday of the Bulls with Michael Jordan, the 85 Bears. So sure. Likewise, those are my teams. But I've been down in Florida for now almost 30 some years. Is there anyone that you've locally picked up outside of those two, of course?
Yeah, I mean, I grew up here. When I grew up in Florida, the only professional team was the Dolphins. And right. The Gators weren't even kind of relevant. But I root for the Gators. I root for the Dolphins. It's funny you mentioned the Bears, 85 Bears. One of the first, 4 or 5 restaurants I built was a restaurant for Walter Payton in Schaumburg, Illinois. I spent 5-6 months up there and got to know Walter pretty well. That was a lot of fun.
What was it called? Excalibur? It was off of Algonquin there in Schaumburg, right?
Yeah, it was called Studebaker's.
Studebaker. I believe it's a Cooper Hawks now, as they
Right.
converted it.
Right.
And I was never old enough to go there because it was more of a adult type place, and I know it had a
Right.
great happy hour and the place to
That's
be
exactly
seen.
what it was. Yeah.
So, okay, what are you most proud of in your professional career?
I would say when I did Geordy's, and Esquire called us one of the top 10 best new restaurants in the country. And then Esquire Food and Wine, Bon Appetit, New York Times full page above the fold. I mean, that pretty much was the highlight. And then in now, I think FobeSoft, being able to give restaurateurs a roadmap on how they can become more profitable, I think is powerful.
What's something most people don't know about you?
That I'm somewhat shy, but assertive, and artistic. I would love to. I haven't had the opportunity to yet, but I love, abstract art and things like that. I love to cook, so that's where kind of my creativity goes. But that's pretty much it.
Okay, you talk about cooking. What's your favorite meal to cook at home, that if people are coming over, it's your specialty you're known for?
I don't necessarily have a specialty. I'll cook across the board. I have a friend of my wife's coming over this weekend. I'm going to do a shellfish saute with a little saffron broth, and start with a shredded potato pancake, some smoked salmon, creme fraiche, and some chives on top. Something like that. It's simple, and I can whip it up in just a matter of an hour or so.
Well, unfortunately, that's all the time we have for this episode. Thanks, Geordy, so much for joining me and sharing all you do for the industry. I always love when I am able to talk to people that are out there trying to help others be successful.
I thank you, Brian. I really appreciate it. I appreciate your time and doing the podcast.
And thank you to everyone for joining us. And here's to celebrating the industry we love and serve. Until next time, stay hungry for success.